Salam, my friend, and peace be upon you again. Preface: The Journey Ahead. There are moments in the history of human thought when the world does not merely gain a new idea, but gains a new discipline of knowing. Not a new gadget, not a new equation, not a new worldview painted on old assumptions. Something rarer, a new way of deciding what counts as real, what counts as evidence, what counts as a legitimate claim, and what counts as a responsible mistake. Most of what we call progress is not progress of truth. It is progress of power, the ability to predict, manipulate, extract, build, and control. That kind of progress can grow even while understanding stays shallow. A civilization can become technologically brilliant while remaining epistemically fragile, like a ship that learns to go faster without learning how to navigate storms. And now, after centuries of accelerating capability, we find ourselves in the strange position of knowing more than any civilization in history, yet trusting less. We swim in data, yet drown in noise. We have algorithms that can mimic insight, yet we cannot reliably distinguish insight from imitation. We have theories of breathtaking elegance, yet the foundations of those theories are often supported by a quiet act of faith. The assumption that the primitives we start with are obvious, given, or just the way reality is. This is why the Holophase project, from the beginning, has not felt like merely writing a theory. It has felt like standing at the edge of a civilizational cliff where a choice must be made. Either we continue building the future on a knowledge system that can be corrupted, or we attempt something harder, building a knowledge system that can defend itself. Holophase was never meant to be a new myth dressed as physics. It was meant to be an immune system for science. It was meant to be the first framework that does not only offer explanations, but offers rules for earning explanations, rules for losing them, rules for revoking them, and rules for proving to future generations that we did not hallucinate. This is why episode 12 matters. It is not another episode. It is the hinge between two ages of the program, the age of constructing the method and the age of daring to apply it to the oldest question humanity has ever asked. Where did everything come from? But Holophase does not allow us to ask that question in the old way. In the old way, Cosmogenesis is a story, a rewind, a narrative, a movie played backwards until the screen becomes a point, and we call that point the beginning. Then we decorate that beginning with whatever primitives our era happens to love. Particles, fields, energy, space-time, inflation, multiverses, quantum foam, or mathematical inevitability. Each generation replaces the costume, but the structure stays the same. We assume a starting stage, then describe what happens on it. Holophase does not permit that. Holophase forces a more uncomfortable question, and therefore a more honest one. What does it mean to say that anything happened at all, before we have even earned the right to say what time is? What does it mean to say something existed, before we have even earned the right to say what somewhere means? What does it mean to say energy, before we have even earned the right to say what measurement is? The old cosmologies begin with a stage. Holophase begins with the rules of staging. So episode 12 is the preface to Cosmogenesis, not because it repeats what we already said, but because it performs a civilizational act. It gathers the scattered pieces of a vast journey and welds them into one solid instrument, one coherent mental machine that listeners can hold in their hands. Only then can we responsibly attempt purify cosmogenesis. Because the reality is simple. Episodes 1 to 11 were not small. They were not casual. They were a continent. Hundreds of hours of work. Thousands of conceptual turns. A cathedral built stone by stone. And when a cathedral is built stone by stone, no one standing inside it sees the full structure at once. You see corridors, you see arches, you see chambers. You may feel the power of it, but you do not always see the blueprint. Episode 12 is the blueprint. It is the 12-part weaving of the complete essence of the Holophase model, so that a listener who has followed us through a long road, perhaps with fatigue, perhaps with inspiration, perhaps with confusion, can suddenly stand back and finally see the whole architecture at once. But this preface is not only for the listener, it is for us too. Because before we step into the Cosmogenesis program, we must do what every honest scientist, every honest philosopher, every honest civilization must do before claiming to explain the origin of everything. We must ask, have we actually earned our primitives? This is the deepest wound in the history of science. And it is not a wound caused by stupidity. It is a wound caused by necessity. When science was young, it needed to start somewhere. It began with things that looked obvious: space, time, matter, motion. Then it refined. Newton gave us a universe of forces and masses on a fixed stage. Maxwell turned that stage into a field-woven theater of electromagnetism. Einstein bent the stage itself into geometry. Quantum mechanics shattered the intuition that objects have definite properties before measurement. Information theory revealed that knowledge itself has structure and cost. And yet, after every revolution, the same hidden pattern returns. We still assume something. We still begin with a set of primitives we do not derive. We assume an arena. We assume a fabric. We assume energy. We assume a Hilbert space. We assume probability axioms. We assume a measurement postulate. We assume a background of mathematical objects and call them real because they work. And working is not nothing. It is a triumph. It is also a trap, because a theory can work locally while being ontologically confused globally. It can give us devices and predictions while leaving the deepest questions unsettled. It can also seduce us into thinking that because our tools are powerful, our foundations must be clean. But in the age we are entering, the age of machine intelligence, synthetic data, engineered consensus, civilization-scale narrative warfare, unclean foundations become dangerous. They become vulnerabilities. They become openings through which myth can enter, wearing the mask of mathematics. Holophase responds to this not by declaring itself the truth, but by declaring a new kind of humility. Nothing is accepted unless it can survive a disciplined sequence of tests. Holophase is therefore not primarily a cosmology. It is a method of epistemic survival. It is a compact between present and future. A promise that we will not hand down beautiful claims without the machinery needed to verify them, revoke them, and reproduce them. This is why the firewall is not an accessory in our work. It is the spinal cord. And if we are honest, it is also why Holophase feels emotionally different from other theories. Most theories feel like castles. Holophase feels like a constitution. A constitution does not tell you what to believe. It tells you what procedures must be followed so that belief does not become tyranny. The epistemic firewall is our constitution for science inside a fee-closed universe. It says, every claim must be a law object with declared scope, declared uncertainty, declared predictions, declared artifacts, declared validity masks. It says, every claim must face counterworlds, placebo universes designed to trick us. It says, every claim must survive independent reconstruction pipelines. It says, Faith predictions must revoke claims automatically, so no zombie laws can walk through history merely because they are loved. These rules may sound harsh, but they are not harsh. They are mercy. They protect us from ourselves. Because the greatest enemy of science has never been ignorance. It has always been premature certainty. Holophase, at its core, is an attempt to do something that almost no civilization has ever successfully done. To build a scientific worldview that is as good at saying no as it is at saying yes. A worldview that treats error as sacred information, not as shame. A worldview that prefers clean failure over beautiful fiction. A worldview that can scale to the complexity and noise of modern reality without collapsing into propaganda. That is the civilizational context. Now, in that context, what is Holophase actually saying? In the simplest words, it says that reality is not built from substances first. Reality is built from difference first. But not difference as a vague philosophical idea. Difference as the most operationally minimal fact required for any measurement, any distinction, any knowledge to exist. We name that primitive condition phi, not because phi is mysterious, but because phi is simple enough to deserve a symbol. The capacity for non-uniformity. The capacity for distinguishable variation. A cyclic order field, not a substance. A map into a circle. Not because we love circles aesthetically, but because cyclicity is the native shape of comparison. Phase wraps, angles wrap, clock hands wrap, interference wraps, and whenever the universe must compare states without absolute anchoring, cyclic closure naturally appears. Holophase says that we never measure phi directly. Absolute phi is gauge. We measure differences. And the first instrument touchable primitive is not a thing. It is change. A equals d phi. From this one differential object, the three great readings emerge together. Omega, temporal cadence, kappa, spatial variation, and nu, kinematic transport. Not as three separate dimensions, but as three inseparable shadows of one underlying change. Triunity is not poetry in this program. It is a constraint. Any valid description must keep time, space, and motion interlocked, because they are not independent substances. They are readings of one field's variation. Then Holophase goes further, and this is where it becomes truly unlike standard science. It says reality is an infinite language, not a finite list of objects. The derivatives of phi do not stop at first order. The derivative hierarchy rises without end. A structured tree of increasingly fine questions about how phi changes. In principle, infinite readability. In practice, finite measurement windows, finite jets, finite uncertainty bounds. The universe has infinite expressive capacity, but every observer has finite access. This tension between infinite structure and finite access is not a flaw. It is the real condition of science. Then comes the integer miracle. Holophase insists that discreteness is not an add-on. It is forced by topology. If phi lives on a circle, then loop integrals of d phi must close in integer multiples of 2 pi. And where phi cannot be smoothly defined, where the circle's closure cannot be consistently assigned, defects appear. Those defects are not extra particles. They are obstructions, knots in the phase fabric. They become the seeds of discrete charges, quantum numbers, and persistent things. The world becomes countable not because the universe decided to be digital, but because cyclic continuity has topological consequences. Then comes the re-education of energy. Holophase does not deny energy. It denies the ancient superstition that energy is a substance. Energy becomes what it always secretly was: a tally, a bookkeeping system that counts structured activity in omega and kappa and their couplings inside licensed windows. The stress energy tensor becomes a derived report on phase structure, not proof of a mysterious energetic fluid. The constants we worship become conversion factors between human units and phase derivatives. Energy becomes accounting, and the universe becomes readable rather than mystical. Then comes the hardest part: laws. Standard science often treats laws as commandments, equations written on the sky. Holophase treats laws as survivors, admissible grammars mapping jets to jets under governance constraints. Because finite data can fit infinite equations, we need a firewall. We need a registry of admissible constitutive classes. We need weak form methods that respect noise. We need errors in variables discipline. We need parsimony under licensing. We need counterworld controls. We need prediction contracts. We need auto-revocation. We need lineage tracking. We need, in other words, a civilization that has learned how to keep its knowledge clean. That is what episodes 1 through 11 have been constructing. Not just a theory of reality, but a full operational civilization-grade method for reading reality. But a method is only proven when it is applied to the hardest possible case. This is the significance of what comes next. Cosmogenesis is the make or break, not because it is glamorous, but because it is unforgiving. Cosmogenesis is where every hidden smuggling attempt becomes visible. Cosmogenesis is where we are tempted to speak beyond our windows. Cosmogenesis is where the story impulse is strongest and the discipline impulse must be stronger. Holophase will not allow us to tell a cosmic origin story with phi as a decorative motif. Holophase demands that we derive the very meaning of origin, time, space, law, matter, energy, information, and observer as steps in an earned chain. Each step licensed, each step falsifiable, each step coupled to predictions, each step carrying its own uncertainty. This is why episode 12 stands between our past work and our future work like a bridge of steel. Episode 12 is not a repeat. It is a reassembly. It is the act of taking the entire holophase method and compressing it into 12 perfect load-bearing beams. 12 parts that a listener can remember, that a skeptic can audit, that a researcher can operationalize, and that a civilization can inherit without the entire archive of hundreds of videos. Episode 12 exists because we refuse to require faith. If someone must listen to 350 long episodes to understand our model, then the model is not yet in its mature form. A mature model can be stated clearly. It can be carried, it can be taught, it can be checked. Episode 12 is therefore the moment we become responsible. It is where we stop assuming that the audience will eventually get it, and instead we do what any real teacher does. We gather the scattered pieces of learning into a single clear picture. Then we point to the door and say, now we can begin the next step together. And what is the next step? Purify cosmogenesis. Not a cosmology painted on physics. A cosmology derived from measurement itself. A cosmology where the first act is not a bang, but a license. Where the first event is not a particle, but a comparison. Where the first structure is not matter, but differential readability. Where the first integers emerge not from decree, but from loop closure. Where the first stable entities arise as defects. Where energy appears as tally. Where laws appear as governed survivors. Where meaning appears as encoder. And where the entire edifice remains firewall protected so that we can separate genuine structure from story-shaped hallucination. This is why the coming program is historically unusual. Because historically, cosmology has been the most vulnerable branch of science. It deals in the largest scales, the oldest times, the most indirect evidence, the easiest narratives. It attracts the mind's hunger for ultimate answers, and therefore attracts the mind's easiest mistake, confusing elegance with truth. Holophase is a rebellion against that mistake. It says, the more ultimate the claim, the more strict the licensing must be. The more cosmic the story, the more ruthless the falsifiers must be. The more tempting the myth, the stronger the firewall must be. In that sense, Holophase Cosmogenesis is not only a scientific project, it is a civilizational project, a demonstration that humanity can attempt the grandest explanation without abandoning the discipline of humility. It is also a philosophical reconciliation. For thousands of years, humans have argued about what reality is made of. Matter, mind, ideas, numbers, God, energy, nothingness. The debate persists because all sides are trying to answer the wrong kind of question. They are trying to describe reality's content before agreeing on the rules of description. Holophase changes the question to something both older and simpler. What must be true for anything to be distinguishable at all? From that question, the Holophase program extracts an ontology that is not metaphysical decoration, but operational bedrock. Difference, comparison, cyclic order, gauge invariance, derivative structure, topological closure, windowed measurability, uncertainty discipline, and governance. It is a philosophy that can be built into instruments. And that is why the program is also civilizational. It unifies philosophy and physics by forcing philosophy to pay the price of measurement and forcing physics to pay the price of epistemic honesty. So this preface is a threshold statement. It is a turning of the page. Up to now, we have been forging the language. We have been building the alphabet. We have been constructing the grammar, the towers, the defect logic, the energy reduction, the semantic encoders, and the firewall. We have been preparing the mind of the listener to be capable of a new kind of reading. Episode 12 is the moment the reader becomes fluent. It is the moment the whole model becomes one story you can carry in your mind like a compass. And then, with that compass in hand, we walk into the deepest wilderness, the origin of the universe, not as a narrative, but as a derivation. So let this preface be understood as a vow. We will not flatter the listener with easy certainty. We will not use cosmic language to hide fragile steps. We will not treat cosmogenesis as entertainment. We will treat it as an audit. We will build a cosmogenesis in which every claim is earned and every error is sacred information. We will build a cosmogenesis that can be checked by future laboratories, future minds, future civilizations. We will build a cosmogenesis that does not require belief, only participation in method. Because if Holophase is right, then the universe is not a machine made of parts. It is a readable field of structured difference. It is phi unfolding into patterns that survive coherence. It is a reality that becomes knowable not by miracles, but by disciplined comparison. It is a cosmos that does not merely exist, but can be read, and can learn through its own internal structures to reel itself. Episode 12 is where we gather the full essence of that claim into 12 definitive beams. And then, after episode 12, we begin the most serious project we have ever attempted. Pure phi cosmogenesis. The firewall verified derivation of reality from the possibility of difference alone. Now the audience is not being asked to remember everything we have ever said. They're being given a single coherent instrument, a compass, a grammar, a method, an immune system. And with it, we step together into the beginning. Not a beginning in time, but a beginning in legitimacy. The first licensed window, the first touchable differential, the first triunity, the first loop that closes, the first integer that refuses to be a fraction, the first defect that cannot be smoothed away, the first tally that humans once mistook for substance, the first law that survives governance, the first meaning that emerges without a mind, the first science that can protect itself. This is the threshold. Always peace be upon you.